are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fika. If I'm a minute late, I apologize. We were talking in the green room. Surprise, surprise. This week, Fika with Vicky welcomes author Janet Trull. We'll be looking into her books, End of the Line and Something's Burning. And yes, she's won awards and had her work published in prestigious papers and magazines, all of which you can find on her website, trollstories.com, but those things can't be felt the way her writing can. She can take a single kaboom moment in a character's life and turn it into a short story that illuminates their whole life experience. In End of the Line's case, she did it with a whole village and its surrounding landscape. She takes on huge issues, wielding her pen like a sword, chopping at them and creating growth until you are left with open eyes, a busy brain, and the feeling that you are not alone. In short, Janet's writing hit my reading sweet spot, seeing things not from the perspective of those who usually narrate these stories, but from those who live each day to survive the next, who don't always have the resources, freedom, or experience to achieve the dream that we're encouraged to aspire to. And in doing so, she inspires us to live our own lives more fully, knowing we too can find resilience. Thank you for the spark, Janet, and welcome to Fika.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have this talk for many reasons. One, I just like I said, you hit my reading sweet spot with this. I don't know what to call it. I said before, I don't know exactly. I mean, it's literature, your basic literature as it is. So, but it's more than that. I mean, on your website, you say backroads, like rural stories. And I guess that's what it is. But there are stories like that have always just appealed to me. So I'm very excited about asking these questions. But before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about End of the Lines and your other writings? So those listening who may not be familiar can jump in if they like.
So this is the book, End of the Line. And I love the cover because this is one of the pictures of that pioneer era that inspired me. So these fellas are, they're hammering in the last spike of the railway that went from Lindsay, Ontario to Haliburton, Ontario. And here they are. It should be about November of 1878. And they... the funny thing is I look at all the plaid. So they got these two guys here have their plaid shirts on. This guy has plaid pants. And you can tell they're Scottish immigrants, Irish immigrants, Welsh immigrants, because it was the time, the era, just like today, much like today, when people were on the move all over the world. The emigration numbers were really high. There were people being persecuted for their religion. There were conflicts. There was even a volcano in Iceland that sent hundreds of immigrants to Canada. And why come to Canada? Because we were giving out free land. We were just a new country, confederated in 1867. And we were trying to populate the country and move people inland into the wilderness area away from the American border. We were a little nervous about our American friends at the time. But anyway.
Due to situations 60 years earlier.
Some things don't change. And some things do, fortunately. But anyway, this opportunity was 100 acres for free if you could settle and build a farm, start farming, and after 5 years, you owned the land outright. So lots of people came, even if they weren't farmers. They thought, how hard could it be to start a farm. But of course, they reached Haliburton and found out that Haliburton is mostly rock and dense pine forest. And so it was not easy, especially when they arrived in November and had the harsh winter in front of them. So this story is really about building a community out of nothing. There was a small community there, incorporated in 1865. So they already had a school and a church and a town hall, a couple of hundred people who'd built a mill and started things. And you can imagine how they felt when the trains started coming in with all these strangers, people who didn't speak English, people who were illiterate, people who arrived without resources at all, with a winter ahead of them. And so there was conflict, and there were barn burnings, and there were people taking advantage of the illiterate by having them sign documents that they didn't really know what they were signing.
And in a great way, the government took advantage of them as well, because it seems like a simple thought to just, I have 5 whole years to build, to clear land and build a cottage, and I'm jumping in there, and it wasn't such an easy thing.
No, it was not. And there were business people behind it investing, mostly business people from England, our colonialist past. So they were expecting to make a profit. They did not make a profit in Haliburton. They did not make a profit building that railway from Lindsay to Haliburton, because they hadn't expected how difficult the terrain would be. So that's how Haliburton got to be the end of the line. The railway was supposed to go all the way up to Ottawa, and they just said, once they got to Haliburton, they said, no more. We're broke. We're not going to go one more foot.
Well, it's beautiful land. It's just not practical land. Like it's a beautiful area, and I mean, it's much the same today. People vacation there in the summer and say, that's it, I want a cottage. And then they spend a winter and say, not anymore. Right?
Yes. Oh, that's so true. And that happened in COVID quite a bit. People were amazed to come up and find a beautiful spot on the far side of a lake, and then realize how hard it was to get to town in February. And the Wi-Fi is really not that reliable. Surprise, surprise. So,
well, with all the rock and the granite from the Canadian Shield, it would just knock it right out. Yeah, I never thought about that. There's no. Well, I read End of the Line during the last little snow kabuffle we had back in January, and I just sat there with a blankie going, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky. Like, there's nothing like reading something from the 1800s to make you realize just how easy we have it now.
It was hard times for sure. And also, in the book, I talk about the fact that you're in this new environment, and you don't have your sisters and your cousins and your dad. They're all back in the old country. So these were a town full of strangers. And who do you trust, I think, is the idea that I wanted to examine when I was writing the story. Because there wasn't a police force at the time.
It was basically, I was just thinking that it was basically lawless. Like
it was like instead of the Wild West, it was the Wild North. And there was a justice of the peace that rode through town every month or so. But for the most part, you had to settle arguments on your own. And so I think that's, how people found their place, whether they went to the barber shop and asked advice from the barber, or the mercantile. And also in this story, there was a community of women up on the ridge known as the Nunnery. And they were kind of the wise women who had healing. They ran something of an orphanage for children that may have lost their parents, and something of a women's shelter for women who were lost or misused. So depending on who you were, you'd go to these different places in town for advice.
Yeah, they were sort of like the social network for the town, for anybody that felt displaced, and that was pretty much everybody. So an interesting note, usually, as I said, we hear these stories of the towns growing and everything, and we hear it from the bank and the people who are on the statues, and the names that remained on the roads, from that perspective. And this perspective that you've used is from those wives who had to take care of children, cook, garden, do everything, the men out lumbering, the accidents that would have happened, all of these things. Those are the people whose voices you write from in this book. And what inspired you to do that? Why those voices?
Well, the station is still there. It's an art gallery now, and it's an art gallery I go to quite a bit. I'm also a visual artist, so my paintings are there. And because I'm there so often, I got more kind of a sense of the number of ghosts that there were in the station, and how many people had passed through that station. Some of them would have been in despair, some of them would have been hopeful, some of them would have been sick. And I had a sense of these many people who'd passed through. And so that's why I wanted to write. And in fact, I wrote a ghost into the story, and he's first introduced at the station. He came from my love of Gordon Lightfoot's song, the Canadian Railway Trilogy. So when I think of railways in the 1800s, I certainly think of Gordon Lightfoot singing about the navvies who worked on the railway. And if you remember, the end of the song goes, "Many are the dead men, too silent to be real." And so I wanted to give a voice to the dead men as well.
And you did. I love that aspect of it right away. I think I mentioned that whenever you walk into a place that seems steeped in history, or like a small town like that, you can almost feel the presence of those people watching you. And you gave personification, if not a live one, to that feeling, to that. And it was excellent. I just excellent. I'm tongue-tied. I just
Well,
loved every
I
minute.
do love small towns. I grew up in a small town, Dunnville, Ontario, down near Lake Erie, and a farming town. And I find that my current town, Haliburton, has much in common with that town, because you have that myth that goes along with the town is really steeped in memory, and it may not be totally accurate, but the old timers tell the stories, and it's the stories that have been told many times, and the memory of the hardships that they went through, and the big flood and the big fire and things that happened. Those are all part of the myth of belonging and building community and helping each other, and it's kind of building a fortress in a way around those people who share those same memories.
It's a double-edged sword, right? When we talk about the sword, on one hand, there's all that belonging, and that on the other hand, it sort of separates from other things that are going on in the world. So yes, I grew up about 40 minutes, I guess, from Denville, out in West Lincoln way, and it brought back so much, just things that you forget. Like, so that's more in. We'll get into Burning Something, because that's an incredible book all on its own. Brian Greiner, also an author. And before we go to you, Brian, I just want to say, send over some of your art. I will put it up. I was so obsessed with your writing. I didn't get to that, but I would like to see some anyways.
Oh, okay.
Brian asks, Janet, does your visual art inform your writing, or does the writing inform the visual art?
Oh, that's a good question for me to think about. I'm actually a very intuitive painter. My landscapes are abstract, and I think I'm an intuitive writer as well. And when I get in the zone in either one, I feel like I'm just kind of channeling ideas that are maybe subconscious sometimes.
So neither nor.
Both in some way.
Brian's a regular. We can talk to Brian however we want.
Sure.
um, Brian, is the historical lore in your area mainly verbal, or has it been written down over the generations?
That's a great question. It is mostly verbal, and Ona, who runs the Nunnery, um, she's of mixed ancestry. So she has a grandmother who's Ojibwe and a grandfather Scottish. And so both those traditions are oral traditions, storytellers, and I think it's really important to see that a lot of the stories that Ona tells up on the ridge are based in landscape, in environment, in lore, and very, very much the grandmother sitting around the fire telling about the past. So, absolutely.
And I was good because any historical fiction takes research,
Mhm.
regardless of what you've heard before or whatever.
Mhm.
I mean, especially if you live in that area. If you get it wrong, you're going to get called out. So
Yeah.
you want to be extra, extra sure. Um, Obviously, you love history. You love that whole feel.
Mhm.
What is your favorite type of research? The museums, the library?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm lucky. I've written for the local paper in Haliburton for years. So I already knew that writing for the paper, you want to be accurate and you want to be kind. And I always would, if I was writing about someone in town, I would send them a copy first. We fact check this first for me because I don't want to make any mistakes. But when you're writing a story, there's a lot more freedom. And I have to say, though, I did get some feedback about a few of the stories in the book, more questions, um, and wondering about was this connected to the story of Dr. Carroll, who actually was one of the pioneering doctors there. And so it's it was interesting to see that people were making connections, but mostly understood that it was historical fiction and that I was taking some leeway. But I have to say, when I uh, got this cover picture, that was one of the pictures in our Haliburton County Museum, and I got a lot of help from them, sort of thinking about the era and wondering who these men were, who the engineer was, who the workers were, and that's so the definitely the museum is one source, but also the local library has many books written by local historians, and some of them are overly nostalgic, about how great it must have been to go out in the bush and tap the trees for maple syrup, and Pa reading the story by the fire, and others were uh, just facts. So this house was built in this time period, and here
You
was
have
the
a
builder.
fast.
There was a story to it. It was just documenting more. So all of those books help me in my research. But I think the storytellers, the old timers, really they love to tell that myth of the past.
And unfortunately, we're losing a lot of that because we don't have that time around the dinner table or whatever
Hmm.
right now. We're really, really busy. So stories like this are important and getting them out is important. And in whatever way just to preserve them. So, as you have. But when you mention those local historians, like travel across Northern Ontario, and I love those books. Like we collect those books. I don't know if there's still a thing really with all of the ebooks and things going on, but I just always loved them because they had, I don't know, they have something
Oh, they're
that
treasures.
you would miss. Yes, yes.
Definitely
They're
treasures.
just fantastic. So, and despite the fact, like, okay, I have to ask, how much, like, was there something like the Nunnery in Haliburton, or was that completely your creation?
Well, I took stories from different time periods. So from the 40s, 1940s, from the 1920s, from the 1960s, and characters. And I reimagined them as they may have been in the 1870s. So yes, there there was a community of women, and with reputations that were questionable. They were marginalized. There was suspicion that they may have not been Christian women. And so, yes, it's a shock, I know. Maybe witches. So there's always that group of women. And so, yes, they gave me that little spark to write about them. But the other thing that sparked my interest in Ona McLeod, who is the crusty woman that kind of ran the place,
I love
was
Ona.
the fact, thanks, was the fact, I love Canadian literature, and Jane Urquhart often had women characters who were definitely part of the landscape. They were connected to the land and the forest and the lakes. And so I wanted to have that character who was connected to the land, and was able to share that with
And she was
people.
part of the changing landscape, not only with her heritage of being part, give me the tribe.
Ojibwe,
Ojibwe. I should have known with the area. Okay. Part
right.
Ojibwe and part Scott. Like
Mhm.
those were the basics. So her and that she was watching the changing landscape. She stood on the hill and she
Mhm.
watched, and she mixed the best of both of those, the ability of her frugal grandfather and
Mhm.
her grandmother, who was a nurturer and
Mhm.
about nature, and used the one to save the other as much as she possibly could and to help others. So I mean, she's a goddess in her own right.
That's that's right. She definitely was. Yeah, I like her because I like the idea that she was a woman that was in the moment, and she was born into an era, and she knew she couldn't change things. She was sad about the destruction of the old growth forest and the pollution of the lakes from the mills, and she was, all those things are dead and gone, and she knew she couldn't save them. So if when you're born into an era, you have to make the best of it. When we used to say, play the hand that you're dealt, and Ona knew how to play the hand she was dealt.
Well, and survived and
Mhm.
survived and helped other people to survive. That wouldn't, because this is what I said in the opening. The resilience of these people is just amazing. Like,
Mhm.
no, we couldn't do it. We
No,
just
we could
couldn't.
not.
And they just kept on going every day, like just, to get up and do the whole thing the next day. So we don't know how to farm. We can't feed the kids. They came from, I mean, most, I think, at that point in time was due to poverty. Most of the
Sure.
migration was due to
Mhm.
poverty, and they weren't finding it any better here. Um,
No, it wasn't that dream, and I think immigrants today are so disillusioned as well. It's you come to make a better life for your family, and often it's not possible.
No, it's just, the land of, okay, Jason. Thanks for listening, Jason. Just discovered your work and can't wait to read End of the Line. I grew up just over the border south of Buffalo, but spent time each summer near Algonquin Park and then lived in Toronto for 2 years.
Thank you.
So, yes, Jason, and in Burning Times, I believe Buffalo is mentioned. Where, I mean,
That's right.
people don't understand when you live so close to the border how lives people are married to people. They go home after work to the States from
I
Canada
have
or from
such great
Canada to the
memories.
States.
Yeah, when I was 10 years old, there was a huge fire in our downtown area. My dad owned a hardware store, so he was jumping out of bed at 3 a.m. And this big old Victoria hotel was burning down. And it happened to also be the home to many Indigenous men who lived in the hotel rooms upstairs, and 13 men died. But I get emotional thinking about it.
Of course.
Because the Buffalo Fire Department came across the border with their fire trucks and helped us put that fire
out. There have been hands, regardless of what we said about not trusting.
Oh, yeah. No, we love Americans.
Oh, and Jason says, the borderlands, as I call them, are a special place. And it really is that that we can mingle back and forth without animosity. And if they would just get coffee crisp chocolate bars, it would be all right.
Well, that's right. Life would be much better.
No, I'm just teasing. So yes, it was difficult for them. Promises were not where they should be. And so we see the resilience of these people going forward. And that, moving over to we'll come back. We're all over the place here, people, something's burning.
Yes.
Yes, something's burning. It's a book of short stories that take place mostly in the southern Ontario area. There is mention of Dorset, that this family stopped for ice cream in Dorset on their way to the park. And I have been craving ice cream from Dorset ever since, because that is a tradition throughout the entire area. But these short stories take a person and they cover experiences, everything from abuse to poverty to and how these people react to these situations. It's not simple. There is sometimes, not that you actually say, but assuming that there is murder at some times, the running away, like it just really gets, and they're really short stories. Like these aren't short stories that go on forever. There's 22 in this one book, and everyone has a different idea, and they're just amazing. I was just glued to this. Like, what's next? My favorite, and I can't remember the name, is where, I mean, I can't really pick a favorite, but I did enjoy the self-combustible man in his chair. Oh, yes, I can see that. I doubt very much that this was a real life experience.
Well, they're all based on true stories, and that actually was based on a story. The house beside my kids' school, I went to pick them up from school one day many years ago, and this house was on fire. And it was some.
You have to know the story, people. Okay, she's not a deranged woman laughing at a burning house.
And in fact, the picture on the cover goes with that story. So something's burning, and this is a book that was published at Bay Press out in Winnipeg, and they're a beautiful indie press with lovely covers and beautiful paper, and they produce so many beautifully literate stories and poetry and so on. But anyway, I got questioned quite a bit about this cat on the cover, and it looks like it's on fire. So the cat is not on fire.
No,
The
no,
cat is
there was.
merely guarding the gates of hell. And so that sometimes you need a cat to do that for you,
Okay,
because
so,
and
and what's the
this kid
story
doesn't.
called? Something's Burning?
Yes, it is.
So I can't remember the title. It's the title of the whole book. All
That's
right,
right.
Vicky. Sometimes I have to question myself. So so that's true. So all of these stories come for your life, because I was going to ask, do you eavesdrop in coffee shops, like
Totally.
you? Totally. I'm like thinking, okay, maybe I don't want to be a close
Be
friend
careful.
of Janet's. Don't share too much when she's around. But
Well, I'll tell you the first part of my book, and I give you that little bit of the warning. So it's dedicated to those of you who might recognize somewhere in this collection of stories an echo of your own brave myths, the ones you told me over a glass of wine or around a campfire or against your better judgment.
So listen, if you ever run into Janet and she says, "Why don't we just go to a wine tasting?" Don't do it.
Do it with caution. But I have to tell you, there are some stories I've taken stories because women are such great sharers of their lives, and I've always enjoyed thinking about how brave some of their stories are, and so I have a couple of stories in this collection, in my first collection, from people who I just have been inspired by how they go through difficulty and hardship. And so I give them a little heads up, and I want you to read the story before I publish it. And everyone said, yes, please go ahead and publish it, because they felt heard and they felt
after years and years, because such things were not talked about, even though, I mean, it's so frustrating because situations could have been stopped, like not happen if it was talked about, but there was no openness. It was just considered the woman's fault, the girl's fault, whatever, and it was just like had become a natural thing. And so I think these stories do need to be told in this way with so the one with the wrestling bus, that was true. You know, I always say that life is way more interesting than fiction.
Well, this is a friend at the ski hill who was talking about his first job back in the 60s was to drive the bus to Montreal to pick up the midget wrestlers. And I mean, it's not okay to say midget anymore, but we'll say
that's what they were called at the time. So it gets very confusing.
And if you look up midget wrestling, it was a huge thing, and they all had names, and they so they would go from one arena in a small town to the next and perform, and they really were proud of their craft. I mean, it was a performance, and they practiced really hard, and they and people loved them. So yeah, that was his job.
When did I'm trying to think of when it's very difficult in life. I feel like when there ceased to be midget wrestling, I feel like it was yesterday, but sometimes yesterday ends up being 30 years ago. So
yes,
I can't, but I don't think it was that long ago.
Oh no! I mean, if you look it up, when pro wrestling was big in the 90s, there were still midget wrestling was still part of that.
So yeah, no, it was very popular, and there is a story in this book that talks about the bus and going on, and it covers that rural feeling. What is that quote that you write on your webpage? It's it's unpaved,
and unpopular, and
unplowed.
Because up in Haliburton, if you have an unplowed road, you don't get out for weeks.
Well, even in West Lincoln or that whole area, you were still cut off. Like I remember during the big blizzard, I may have been in high school at that time. I don't like to talk about it. But they were going to school for 2 weeks, and we needed snowplows we were out of school for 2 weeks because the snowplows, like, it just stopped everything. So if people don't understand, you leave the rural area to go visit your friends in town, you take a toothbrush and a change of clothes, because the drifting, you're not going to want to drive home, drifting across the farm fields.
That's very true.
Brian asks, Janet, do you think your writing will inspire other local writers and writers in other small towns to tell the stories that are quickly being lost?
I hope so. I'm teaching a writing course at Fleming College this spring and fall, and that's what I am hoping to do is share that idea that we have to tell the stories, whether they're memoirs or whether they're stories that we've heard, because there are so many people who want to share their stories, but writing them down is a challenge. So we definitely want to encourage that.
And I wanted to ask, I wanted to get your opinion. Okay, because
all of
this has
those
been on my mind. Because as I mentioned, I have to do interviews. So I do not think that locations, say, for example, you wrote about West Lincoln, you wrote about Southern Ontario, you wrote about Haliburton, that these books, people should think that they aren't going to get anything out of these books if they don't know the area and they don't know the people, because there is a common experience. The settlement of Haliburton would I know that I've talked to Taryn S., which is a conjuring witch from South Carolina, and I think down there. But when she talks about some of the things in the book and that, I can feel them because I grew up in a rural area, right? So these things would be you would still get that feeling if you were in a rural area.
Think so. And I think everybody has their own small town, even in a big city of Toronto. My friends who live there are part of a neighborhood, and Toronto is a city of many small neighborhoods, and they're all your small towns. That's, you're the bake shop where you go to meet with people for coffee. And so I think, we can all identify, and worldwide as well. I think the part about belonging is sort of understanding the code for the town where you are. And I remember being in Cyprus with friends of ours, and the code there meant that you ate whatever you were given, and that you ate late at night, 10 o'clock at night. They were still bringing us food, even if you knew you weren't going to be able to sleep. You were going to eat together and sit together, and that's important.
That's the way it was,
to honor wherever your small town is.
It is, and it's something like, I haven't been out to where I grew up for a while, and I'm sure there are many more roads, many more paved roads. I mean, every time I venture into the world, it's like, no, that road wasn't there before. That whole world wasn't there before.
Right.
So we lose them. But when we talk about the codes, that's why the stories are so important. The reasons. I think that we're losing a lot of the reasons behind things with the changes. It's not saying they were good, which is what I love about your book. There's no judgment based. It's up for us to decide whether we're comfortable with something or something is comfortable. You just, they're not facts, but you just lay the circumstances out there, I think is what it is. And but
that's right. And I think that the stories are about people who don't let their tragedies define them. They move along, and they understand that all of us really have challenges. All of our families are messed up. All of our lives have ups and downs and ebbs and flows. And if you can empathize with others when they're going through hard times, I think that's That's the best.
That's what I say. When you finish reading these books, though I've never been on a wrestling bus, but you don't feel alone. Because
Oh,
these
that's
are the
nice.
stories that resonate with
Mhm,
everyone, that are
mhm,
not told, that are sort of, as much as there is the code in a small community,
mhm.
whether, a block in the big city or whatever, there's that code of things you don't say,
Right.
that you don't
Yes.
talk about.
Yes. And there's the way to talk about people and the way that you're not in a hurry to get to the point. You're going to ask how your mom is first, and uh, it's a more of a leisurely approach to being with people in the moment. So,
Well, there are some things that you brought up about that really, you forget as you get older. But we were talking about change, because there has been a lot of change in the world. Like, forget our parents, we had to walk to school. Whatever. No, we're talking like we went from having 3 stations to like VCRs to
yeah,
streaming and Bewitched anytime we wanted to.
yes,
To like, and then also the social changes and those things, from like things that weren't even discussed in front of me, to there's been a lot, okay,
yeah,
and sometimes you get tired, but it talks about how you're a brave woman. You talk about how the change and the thinking it's difficult for people, and it can't
mhm,
be rushed sometimes. It's not a
mhm.
matter of liking or disliking. It's just there's so much there and backstory that it's just wiped clean.
Yeah, I'm so proud of people actually for bearing all the changes, social changes that we've had in the last 40 years, for example. And it's difficult. And when you talk about small towns, and people used to put up the ramparts in their small towns and sort of complain about the tourists in the summer, but now the ramparts are being breached from within. It's when the young generation does things and behaves in a way that the parents and grandparents just cannot understand, but they try so hard, and I am proud of
they
people
they
for the
are
work that they've put into trying to understand.
they're very brave, and not everybody spends the amount of time on the computer or whatever to get terminology and everything
Mhm,
down pat. And
mhm,
and it was a look into that. Not about not there's a line about, change comes here slowly. Like 40 years ago, we were against this, and
yes,
maybe that was 10 years ago here. That's about
yes,
it. Like,
yes.
sometimes, you feel
Give
like,
people a chance, yes.
but the lunch pails story, like, nobody uses lunch pails anymore that were hidden before school. I lived that. Okay.
Yes,
I hit that lunch pail because it was just not understood, because you took a lunch pail. That's what you want, a brown paper bag. Like,
mhm,
and
mhm,
now I look at it and think those brown paper bags were so useless if they got wet.
that's right. It was change is not always good, and like I say, it's the ebb and flow of change that is so interesting, and the pendulum going back and forth, but, yeah, it is amazing. I quite enjoy thinking through a story, and thinking of, first of all, that kernel that it was based on. When in my book, in the Something's Burning, I have the book divided into 4 sections, and the first one is tinder, because I say a curl of birch bark, some dry grass, cattail fluff. You cannot start a story without an idea, a conversation, or an experience. So that's the tinder for the fire,
And
and
then it
those
goes,
stories at the beginning are kind of the um, uh, ones that start a fire. And then we move on to spark. Sulfur smells like an invitation when a match is struck. Once you start the fire, you must stay and tend it. Without fuel, it will fizzle and die. Then I go on to inferno and coals. So each part of the book really has that life of a fire from the beginning to the end. But that's why I so appreciate the generosity of the people that I've known who've shared their stories with me and said, yes, go ahead and print that story.
And I'm sure that they appreciate that you asked. Like that is I think that's the way it should be. I'm impressed because you have to respect people's stories. That's who they are. It's so important. And everybody, if you understand people's stories, you understand them. It's not, you don't see, I'm like, never judge a woman by the cat she has on her sweatshirt, right? Because you don't know who she was, where she came from, like what happened. You don't know any of those things. And I think it would help us all to think a little bit about the writer. What if? I remember I was waiting in the hospital and there was an older woman and her phone ringer went off and it was the theme song for Mission Impossible. And I was like so impressed. I was like, what is going on there? Like, is she a spy? Fun. Is she, yeah. And these stories really open up a channel to do that, an encouragement to do that, to look beyond that moment.
Thank you.
I think. So are you writing anything new? Is what's going on in Janet's head?
Oh, I am. Thanks for asking. I've got a novel that's ready for editing right now. Like Hemingway said, write drunk and edit sober. So now I have to look for some sober time. It's called Canadian Saint. And it's based on, Leonard Cohen wrote a book years ago called Beautiful Losers. And in it, he writes a small essay on what is a saint. And so this is a story about a woman who goes looking for the Canadian saint. And so that's something that's on my desktop. And let's see, what else do I have here? I wanted people to know that I've got a page on Goodreads, and I have End of the Line on there. So this is Blue Denim Press, which is an indie press in Coburg, and Something's Burning is from an indie press in Winnipeg, At Bay Press. Also by At Bay Press, I've got a collection of short stories called Hot Town.
I have to read that. I haven't read it yet. Is it?
This is more. There are quite a few Dunville stories in here, and Haliburton stories as well. But I'm pretty fond of those stories. And I also have a little book called Once a Storm. At Bay Press publishes From the Heart series. So the idea is to have a little book to send people when a Hallmark card isn't quite enough. And this is a book for people who may have a family member who've gone through addiction. And it is dedicated to my friend's daughter. And I'll just read you the dedication at the end. To Katie Danielle Perry. Once a peaceful, loving child, once a teenager suffering from anxiety, once a young adult addicted to OxyContin, once a victim of accidental overdose, forever a blue-eyed angel. So that's just a little book to memorialize people who've struggled with addiction and in their families as well.
You
That's
cry
on
a
his
lot
site
when
as
you're writing, don't you? I envision you being the writer with the Kleenex box beside the computer, which is good because it said if you're not crying, it's not worth writing. That's
That's
I've read that. So okay. Hubby would like to know, did you ever come across the story that you brought that last one, but we were
Mhm.
not able to bring to paper because it was just too much, too brutal?
Yes, and I keep those on my laptop because I realize that yeah, sometimes that's where they must stay. But I find that when you do write a difficult story, the good thing is that you get it out of your head and onto paper, and then you're not waking up in the middle of the night thinking about it. So
And
absolutely,
great advice if you're living a
yes.
really difficult story. I know if I can't sleep, I have to get up, and if
Mhm.
once I write it down, it's been put someplace, right?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
so
Yeah, it's on the paper and then out of your perseverating mind. So,
right, right.
yeah.
It's important. You've told somebody that, even if it's your journal
Mhm.
or the computer. So what you're going to be teaching this spring at
Yeah,
Fleming?
it's a course called Welcome to Writing, and this is really what I want to share with people is that you get things down on paper, whether it's a memoir or a story, a novel, a poem. So we'll be practicing that at Fleming College in Haliburton, and yeah, that's. I'm also going to be helping out with our local Haliburton literary festival called Bookapalooza this summer, and didn't choose the name, but it is
I
unforgettable.
like it.
It does make it stand apart from other literary festivals.
Well,
And also, I'll be helping with the Northumberland Festival of the Arts down in Coburg and Gritlit in Hamilton.
so
So, mhm,
this is one of the Fika things is as we think about the title of that book is that sometimes people get it in their head that reading is like academic and you have to read certain books but reading
mhm,
is fun and it should
yes,
be a party. So I'm loving the
right.
name.
Well, that's one thing I tell people is you can't be, you can't be a reading snob. Uh, and one of the things Stephen King says in his book on writing, which actually gave him a lot of credibility. People thought, oh, he's just a horror writer, but he knows a lot about writing. And he said, you have to be a reader. Read everything, read widely, and understand the world that you live in.
And talk about it. Like, look how much fun
Mhm.
we're having here. Right?
That's-
I mean, we've dealt with some very, very serious subjects,
Mhm.
but we're still, you know,
It's important. It is fun. And that's why I love book clubs. And one thing about book clubs, if you're in a book club or you want to start a book club, you can go to your local library and ask that one of these books or a book that you like be put into a book club set so that your book club doesn't have to purchase the books, but you can share them and talk about them. And so that's something too. Go to the library and go to your independent bookstores as well, because you can request. They're so good. Our local bookstore in Haliburton is called Master's Bookstore, and Kathy's great at looking up the book you want and getting it in within a few days. So I definitely recommend indie publishers. Support the indie publishers. Support
and
the indie bookstores.
because we want different voices out there. And we
We
want
do.
we want because once you get to a certain age, you've read a lot, so it
Mhm.
all starts to sound the same if you don't get
Yes.
some new thing, new voices, new words out there. So the people can catch you on your Goodreads page.
Yes,
They
definitely.
can go to your website, which is
Yeah.
scrolling around along the
Mm-hmm.
bottom here.
Trollstories.com.
It's
Yes.
in the description, and just think troll, but with a U,
Yes.
stories.
When I was a teacher, I told the kids rhymes with dull. Troll rhymes with dull.
I know I said, I don't think you're dull. I don't think these people have found you dull
You have to
whatsoever.
remember it somehow. Yes, it's not Mrs. Troll, which some people, yes.
I'm thinking troll bridge. Like you connect one experience to a whole experience.
Yes.
And I think that's where we have to leave it. Okay.
Okay.
So we have 5 minutes, but I think I'm going to close down the comments before we get carried away again. So thank you all for participating. All right. And right. And thank you. Thank you so much for coming today, Janet. I was so looking forward to this. I would have had I get a pile large of reading, but as soon as I read the synopsis, the back cover for that book, I
Oh,
knew I wanted to read it. The cover and everything just put me in. So people go and check this book.
thanks very much. And just to end, I'm a great fan of Anne Marie MacDonald, another Canadian author, and she is sometimes also accused of writing dark topics.
I do, I was going to tell you because you had that.
Yeah.
You had that quote you put on
Oh,
the bottom
yes.
of the
Oh,
book,
yeah, that's
and
right.
it almost felt like you were saying, "Okay, take this, but this is this is my
It's well,
warning."
she's so brilliant at saying, if there is a character left at the end of the story to tell the tale, then it's a happy ending.
Yeah.
So if you can survive this life and still talk about it and be in the moment with your friends, that's the goal.
And so you think we should go out and check Anne Marie as well? Is
Oh yeah. Well, I am a great fan of Canadian literature. So again,
no? I
personal
think I should
taste.
have
That's why book clubs are so
everybody.
great.
Well, yeah, and also we have. I mean, I have found doing this show. I have got. I've always been a free range reader. Like I don't do lists and things. I just
Mhm.
find whatever with no. But I have gone into some genres and things that I might not necessarily have gone into, and have found myself really really impressed. Like,
Yes.
oh, this is
Yeah,
interesting. So you never know unless you try it. So hopefully
absolutely.
it's already the end of January that you'll be able to be sober enough to edit by April.
That's right. Ernest,
Curling's over. Just throwing all the stereotypes
no
in there.
promises.
So and we'll be looking forward to that next book.
Thank you.
Janet, and knock on the Fika door anytime you want to. I just love
Thank
this
you.
time. So you
I
take
definitely
care.
will.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Okay. Once again, end of the line. Check it out because you are going to love this book. Everybody. So anyways, I will see the rest of you next week. Until then, may your coffee be hot and your story sweet. Thanks for listening, everyone.